So your position now is that you're reservedly supportive of Ukraine, but that reserved support seems to be held back from being extreme support, probably because you're like, I also don't like Western like alliance building and encroachment or something along those lines.
Well, yeah.
First, how you doing? Doing okay?
I'm all right. I'm all right. How about you?
I'm doing okay. Well, I'm just watching everything that's going down with Prigozhin and the Wagner group right now. It's pretty weird stuff, man. I don't really know how to make of what to make of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been following the very recent event, so yeah. You had to tell me about that one, but sure.
Yeah, it seems that Prigozhin is kind of threatening to overthrow the Ministry of Defense for its incompetency in his mind. And the military is mobilizing in like major cities, and I don't really know if it's just all talk, which is what I think it probably is, or if they're actually moving columns. Because I saw Surovikin, General Armageddon, come out with a statement along the lines of "stop the columns," and I'm like, "Stop the columns? There's columns of Wagner guys. Where are these columns going?" Then I see some rumors on Russian Telegram, so it's all very confusing right now. We don't know exactly what's happening. No matter what, it doesn't look good for the unity of the Russian military to see this type of high profile of fighting where the largest PMC in the Russian military, associated with the Russian military, is basically saying, you guys suck. We're going to come there and we're going to give you basically what sounds like a trial by fire for the Russian military establishment.
Well, do you think that they're only bringing in Wagner Group because like they're desperate, or like why do you think that?
You mean the Russian military into Ukraine, or the Wagner is doing this because they're desperate?
Yeah, to Ukraine, I mean.
I think they use Wagner in Ukraine for a few reasons. I think one, it's technically not the Russian military, and so if it engages in certain practices and maneuvers that it would look not as good if the Russians did it, directly, they can engage in that behavior. So if they want to engage in extremely dangerous operations where they use these prisoner soldiers, I'm not going to say just to literally just throw them to death, but they use them to draw out fire before sending them the more experienced guys from Syria. Like, they can engage in that behavior and they don't need to report their deaths on the official Ministry of Defense like accounts, which they don't really do that anyway, but that gives them another layer of deniability for that. And when these videos come out of Wagner, say like executing one of their own guys with a sledgehammer or, castrating somebody, they can be like, that's not us. And that's part of the reason why Putin and his government has been somewhat distant from like being pictured with people like Utkin and others, because that gives them a layer of deniability. It allows them to practice a lot more asymmetrical warfare and work with a private military company that has a lot of experience in locations like Syria. As much as hate Wagner gets for like the human wave tactics, which is 100% real, that they do that. They send in these more trash units before sending in the more experienced guys to kind of soften up the positions. And that was useful to the Russians to capture Bakhmut. It took them much longer than it should have, to extreme casualties, but they couldn't have captured Bakhmut probably without Wagner.
So do you think they're kind of like the Russian equivalent of Azov and Right Sector in Ukraine then?
Probably not really, because like Azov in Right Sector, I've interviewed Right Sector fighters, and I've done probably a lot more research into Right Sector. Right Sector started as a volunteer corps, basically when the Ukrainian military was too incompetent to, stop the Russians from taking Crimea, and they weren't stopping like the Russian arms coming into the country and the troops intruding into the Donbass. A lot of Ukrainian nationalists and Ukrainian patriots, they were very angry about the situation, and so they started volunteer battalions. Right Sector came out of Euromaidan. They had like these street patrol groups that eventually became military units, volunteer corps that were sent east. While the Wagner Group is a private military company that is operating in Africa, operating in Syria. It's a lot more involved in asymmetrical warfare. It's not really like a volunteer battalion in the same way. Not to mention, like, these groups did not have large scale like availability of recruiting prisoners from prison, giving them basically, hey, you murdered somebody, don't worry, man, here's a gun. Like, they didn't have the ability to do that. I think these are two different groups. If I wanted to, I don't think there is like volunteer battalions on the other side as well. I don't know if there's a direct equivalent to Right Sector, or as of, but there are certainly like more ultra nationalistic right sector, like Russian nationalist volunteer battalions as well on the other side. I would say like one of the most extremist groups fighting the entire country is Rusich, which is a Russian neo-Nazi group, which regularly like releases like manifestos talking about we need to ban the Ukrainian language. These people despise the people we occupy, despise us, and we need to basically beat the love into them. We need to denazify the country, and that means de-Ukrainianizing the country. So like that would be maybe a group I would point to on the other side.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I agree with everything you said about them. Like that just tends to be how these private PMCs are used. I mean, we use them, like Blackwater. I'm sure you've heard of them. Like that's kind of the same way that we use them. They're very useful for like sort of removing like culpability when they do terrible shit.
Wait, was Prigozhin just arrested? Does anybody have a link on that? You guys are saying things in chat, but you gotta like link me this shit so I continue. I'm sorry. This is like major news story, so I continue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, that's just how PMCs tend to be used. It's just to sort of remove responsibility from the actual military of the country that's at war. So America uses things like ones like Blackwater. Yeah, Russia uses Wagner Group. I mean, I think that they should be banned for the most part, really.
The Wagner Group. I mean, I think the Wagner Group behaves.
Well, no, like all PMCs, really. Like.
I think the idea of like a private military I don't know if like that's practical to ban them, but I think at the end of the day, in my like ideal world, there should not be a private military company. Militaries would probably, I think I would want these especially like Wagner's not even like a private military company in like the traditional sense. It's really an extension of the Russian government that just allows them more deniability, which is also immoral in and of itself because you're just trying to remove yourself from a lot of your actions. But I generally agree with the sentiment there. What the fuck is going on? This is some crazy shit.
Yeah, but well, so I was told that when I was going to come in here, we were going to talk about my debate / discussion with Loanerbox. I mean,
yeah, I wanted to ask you first, how did you get into that panel that we were on together, the one with Wick and everything?
Because Wick invited me. What do you mean?
No, I just mean like did he know you beforehand and was like, oh, this is somebody who knows a lot about this, and I want to like invite them on to talk about it and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, no, I've been on several of Wick's closed panels before when he was smaller. So yeah, I knew him from that. So yeah, that's why.
Okay, so when did you start like following the conflict?
I mean, since it began, really.
Since it began?
Yeah.
So you were following 2014, or?
Well, no, I mean since the invasion began.
So 2014?
No, I mean the recent invasion.
Okay, gotcha.
Come on, dude, quit being pedantic.
Well, I don't know if that's pedantic.
I mean?
You said the invasion. I mean, it was invasion, right?
Come on, all right. Yeah, I get it. You're very smart, DylanBurns, but come on, just like try listening. But okay.
You said what do you mean?
All right, but anyways, but all right, but anyways, shit. Well, okay, so I watched your watching of me talking to Loaderbox last night.
Yeah, I was really I was kind of baffled.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, I see why. And I actually, you left before I said something that kind of relates to this whole thing. You didn't hear what I said to Loanerbox. I gave him, if you listen to the very end of it, I actually gave him a reason why I seemed very underprepared for that debate. And so I guess I'll just tell you it right here. And the reason for that is because I'm a pretty new debater overall, right? I'm a newbie debater, and I was pretty nervous about this debate because it was the highest profile debate that I'd ever been in by that point by far. So like I told you I've been on a handful of panels on Wick's show, maybe a couple on like Prime's show, but none of them were like with as high profile people as you or Brianna Wu. So I was kind of like just nervous, like leading up to it and during it. So like that caused me to kind of like underprepare because I was looking forward to the debate with like a sort of sense of dread. I kind of like want to put it on my mind. I just didn't study up as much as I had wanted to. So that's why I was underprepared. I'm a newbie. I'm a noob debater. I'm this is a thing that I'm just have to get used to just by doing more of them, you know. So
So
it wasn't my best performance, and I'd realized that.
so you were nervous about the debate, and so you didn't study as much as you wanted, and
Yes.
that's what caused it. Okay. I'm willing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt for that. Do you want to get back to basics on this, like the basics of the conflict, or is there anything that I said in response to what you said that you wanted to address before we got to the basics of it? Like, is there anything that you're like, that wasn't very fair of Dylan, or like, I disagree with you on that point? Because I did watch it. If you already watched it, then I don't think I need to restate any of it. Is there any of that you'd be like, you know what, I want to challenge you on that, Dylan? When you said I was wrong there, I disagree.
Shit. I'm having trouble remembering details from what your video on it, but yeah, but also, all right. So I wanted to say something else that's pretty important, and it will I think it will shape this whole discussion, though. So I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about this stuff, especially since my debate with Lonerbox, and I kind of changed my mind on a few things.
Okay.
So yeah, I about the great powers thing. There's the first one. So I still
that was the
believe
thing.
that.
Sorry, but
Yeah.
that confused me because you said you were a Marxist, and then you were talking about like John Mearsheimer's work, like the great powers work, and I've seen a lot more Marxists using it, but that always confuses me because like that type of analysis is the analysis of empires, is the analysis, it kind of like rejects a lot of Marxist like geopolitics, which is a lot more revolutionary in nature, which I would assume would not accept that empires are just empires and that's how it is.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. I basically come to agree with that and see the inconsistency of that. So like, here's the thing. I still do think that the great power model is largely accurate for how things, for the most part, how things work in the world. But that doesn't. That my response is now different. My response is now more so in line with the Marxist position, which is that we do not have to simply, just look at that with a sense of resignation and accept it. So like smaller countries like Ukraine or like Cuba, which you also mentioned, yes, they should be able to and even encouraged or supported in sort of going against the domination of the great powers. And yeah, so that's my view on it now. So although I do think that the great power reality is pretty much a reality of our world, I also now I agree that like yeah, we could ignore it or go against it. So yeah, that's where I am now on that.
Okay, so is there anything else? Because I guess we could go to one of the main things but I just want to make sure I gave you an opportunity. I don't want to like just be like, okay, here's the things I disagree with you on, and like start pounding you or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, here's another pretty important one that I've changed my mind on. All right. So I guess I've come around and now I consider myself more of a very critical. I'm a supporter of Ukraine, but a very critical one, and especially
You're a supporter of Ukraine now.
Yeah, basically. But here, basically, as long as Russia is invading them, I am a supporter of them because while I do still agree with most of the things that I said earlier, that there was a lot of push and pull from Russia and from American and NATO influence on Ukraine's actions. That just flies out the window when they're being invaded, because that just escalates it to a whole nother level. And I think that's just not good. And so as long as they're being invaded, I support them basically until they're able to kick Russia out, because again, it's just an unnecessary level of escalation. So yeah, that's where I am.
So I think we're getting to a lot more reasonable position here, or at least we're getting to a somewhat more reasonable position. When you say kick the Russians out, I just want a clarification. Do you mean like out of all of what is internationally recognized as Ukraine, right? What most nations like see as Ukrainian territory? We're talking Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhia, Kherson, and Crimea, or do you mean like most of Ukraine, but actually let the Russians keep this? Do you mean like all of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think I would say probably all of it, yes. But I mean, I don't know. Crimea might be more difficult because it's been under Russian control for longer. So like, I don't know about that one, but at least the rest, definitely. Like, yeah, Donetsk, Luhansk, all the others. Sure, yeah.
Okay, so your position now is that you're reservedly supportive of Ukraine, but that reserved support seems to be held back from being extreme support Probably because you're like, I also don't like Western like alliance building and encroachment or something along those lines.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just see the whole waters as being muddied and tainted just by the sort of again encroachment and involvement of Western capitalist influences and Russia. I mean, also same thing with Russia. All right, I'm applying it to both. So it's just, I just see it as kind of a proxy war. Like I know a lot of people don't like it being described that way, but I just kind of see Ukraine as a sort of proxy battleground between the West and Russia, and it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, especially for Ukrainians, but. It's just for that reason I have trouble just like I don't know. I have trouble separating that from the Ukrainian desires for I don't know independence, but I don't know. I still support them in the war though. And also
I guess
another problem I have. Go ahead.
about the proxy thing, because this is the thing that always confused me, because when I think of the word proxy, right? I would say, like, for example, the Russian like militias that Ukraine has fighting for them, like the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Russian like Liberty Group or whatever they're called, the Russian Free Legion. That's a Ukrainian proxy fighting in Russia. That's a Ukrainian-backed Russian group fighting the Russian government. That is something I would directly say that is a proxy of the Ukrainian government. That doesn't talk anything about the morality of the organization. It's a proxy of the group, and I would be very willing to say that because it is a direct extension of the Ukrainian government's like military fighting force, fighting against what probably the majority of Russians want. But when you look at Ukraine and you look at Ukrainian society, if you poll Ukrainians, they very obviously want to expel the Russians. The vast majority of them want to win the war. The last poll that I saw that was done a few days ago, so it had like 84% of Ukrainians unwilling to make any territorial concessions. And when somebody says proxy, the image people get in their mind is like of a puppet. You know, where one group, like the United States, is controlling another group and making them fight on their behalf. But if the United States wasn't there, the Ukrainians would still be fighting. In fact, in 2014, when the Americans were not there, and Obama, in my opinion, low-key abandoned them outside of like some like basic sanctions. I was really angry at a recent Obama interview where he's trying to whitewash this history. The Ukrainians still fought. And in fact, many of them fought outside of the ranks of the government to fight against the Russians. And so I think when some people hear proxy, they think America is just using Ukraine to undermine the Russians against the wishes of the Ukrainians. But that's not what's happening. And I would want this same logic to be applied to places like Algeria, when the Algerians fought for their independence, or in any number of locations like in Bangladesh or anywhere else where people fought for their independence.
Well, okay. When I say proxy, I don't mean just like in the war. By the way, so I'm talking about also events leading up to the war. Like as I mentioned in the debate, and we went at it on this one about the money that we have been giving to Ukraine for decades now.
Oh yeah, I was really frustrated with you on that. Yeah, I assumed that just came from complete ignorance. That you just didn't know what you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, I did not. Yeah, it was ignorance of the specifics of it. Sure, yes. About where exactly did it go? Yeah, I was ignorant of that, but I wasn't ignorant of the fact that we were giving money to them because we were.
I mean, yeah, but that's pretty vague, isn't it? Like, we could say that about basically every country in Europe, right? Or there's so many countries in Africa we give money, right? We give money to deal with like cholera outbreaks, or we give money to deal with this or that. And a lot of the money we gave to Ukraine was to deal with like human trafficking or like border patrol or like anti-corruption efforts and stuff like that. And when we're trying to connect that to what happened in 2014, the implication in my mind is always we drilled money into Ukraine in order to cause discontent, which eventually came in the overthrow of the Ukrainian government on behalf of America, an American-backed coup. When a lot of the money that's being talked about doesn't have anything to do with that whatsoever, and the stuff that did have to do with that is extremely milquetoast. It's like NGOs that like complained about corrupt judges, which I don't think that started a revolution. I thought it was the violence of the regime.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but okay, so I actually did do some more research on that one. Maybe you'd like to know, but so yeah, I have this New York Times article up right now that was written in 2004, and it's called "Dollars for Democracy: USA to Ukraine Challenged," and in this article there are actually U.S. politicians as well that not only Ukrainian politicians and people, but U.S. couple. There's only a couple. U.S. politicians accusing and it's 58. The number they give is $58 million that we gave to Ukraine. So the 58, they're accusing that aid money of being used to go to influence certain candidates, which was Yushchenko. So basically, that we use that money to give to Yushchenko, and so the two I think they're both senators that say this. One of them is Ron Paul, and one of them is this guy named who's the other one? Oh, Adolphus Towns. He was Representative Adolphus Towns from New York. Mm-hmm. They are the two who were accusing us of using that money to basically unduly influence their politics. Now, I mean, this is just one article, so I'm not going to just uphold this as fucking.
Well, could I just ask, like, what evidence did Ron Paul have of this? Right, I would imagine he would say it like we saw this money went to this, which is like a proxy for this candidate, and he used it for campaign funds, or like, what did he have?
I don't know if he gives any evidence in this article, but he basically, he just, I don't know, he just says that it was used to support Mr. Yushchenko, and he called for an investigation. Yeah.
Was there an investigation?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Hold on. But during it... No, I don't think that there ultimately was, so...
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know, but my point is that, there are clearly I'm not the only one who thinks this. There are other people in government.
Well, yeah, I know there's other people who think this. It's just I think that a lot of this comes from, like, I see a lot of American politicians saying it now. I see like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying it. I see Matt Gaetz saying something. I think Mike Lee said something similar. And then I'll look, and it'll like accusations of like money washing is something that we've seen recently. And then they'll talk about FTX, and then I'll go and I'll dig into it, and I'm like, oh, there's nothing here. This is bullshit. And then they'll make a claim somewhere else, and I'll do some digging and be like, okay, this is bullshit. And it's not impossible for me to imagine that during the rebuilding of Ukraine, an extremely corrupt country, that the American government put money somewhere that could have been like, look, if in order to get this type of government contract, we need to grease the hands of this official. That isn't impossible for me to believe, but it's just frustrating that when there's so many accusations of it, but nobody can ever provide me with any, like links or sources to it. Because I can think of things that America did that was fucked to Ukraine. One of the main things I would point to is the Budapest Memorandum. The idea that we would sign an agreement asking a nation to give up their nuclear stockpile in exchange, we would defend their sovereignty. They get invaded. And then Obama says, whoopsie, man, that sucks. But basically tells them to stand down. Right? Ooh. And those would be things that I'd be extremely critical of. It's just that, there never seemed to be much teeth to this. And even if there is teeth on the idea that America was involved in Ukrainian politics with dark money or anything like that, that doesn't necessarily is connected to what happened in 2014, which was in reaction to, Yanukovych pulling out of his promise to enter the association agreement.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, I'm reading the rest of it. Yeah, it looks like there wasn't an actual investigation. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now, I guess, on that one. So
okay, let me just be clear. My point is not that it's impossible that America ever engaged in corruption in Ukraine, or it's impossible that America never gave money to something that shouldn't have been given in Ukraine. But when I hear these big numbers of like $12 billion or something like that, and you start looking at the numbers, the vast majority of it is going into things like human trafficking, or like, because when you talk about like post-Soviet collapse, people don't know how bad it got in many parts of Eastern Europe. I remember I interviewed Gennady Makhnenko for like a short mini doc on him that I was doing, and he ran the largest children's like orphanage in the post-Soviet Union, like post-collapse Soviet Union, and he was like going out into the streets just picking kids out of the gutter, just addicted with drugs and catching AIDS from dirty needles, and it was bad. It was a country in desperate need of a financial injection and assistance. Not a Monroe Doctrine. What's it called? The thing we did after World War II. We injected a ton of money into Europe.
Marshall
yeah, like a Marshall Plan or something along those lines. And so I don't think it's that hard to believe that a country in that type of economic state would end up looking to the unipolar power. We're talking 1990s America. It's the unipolar power. There's no other country that could even get close to the strength that we had then, and was looking for financial assistance as it tried to drift away from communism.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I understand that. But yeah, also I'm reading in that same article, it's saying that we used it for various different things like political party development. Shit, I actually scrolled off of it, but offered by the International Republican Institute. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suppose that we could have been using that to develop particular parties that we liked more. I don't know, but I'm not going to say that with any certainty. All right, so
okay. So I would like to ask you, and this is always the thing I would like to ask people moving forward, especially after seeing the recent Obama comments, which really kind of miffed me. And this will be the thing we kind of end on, because I feel like now that you've changed a lot of your positions, there's not really much for us to talk about, right?
Well, no, I actually had a question that could lead us down an interesting conversation.
So let me ask this will be my one question, definitely because my audience seems to mostly want to just get back to this Prigozhin news, because it's like 1990s Russian again, shit's chaotic. What would you have done differently when the Russians invaded in 2014 to try to de-escalate the situation? Because a lot of people talk about like America's like evil activities during this time, and I have a lot of criticism of American foreign policy during the Obama and Bush administration. But my main criticism of Obama post 2014 is he was unbelievably weak on this war since 2014, and not sending military aid. It wasn't until the Trump administration that we actually sent like a lot of the more quote unquote offensive weapons, meaning the things that actually blow up stuff, which is kind of necessary in a defensive war. The furthest Obama ever got was counter battery radar, so they could see the shit coming at them when they're getting blown up, right? So what is the thing that should have been done maybe like differently to like, comfort the Russians or make them feel better?
I mean, yeah, I'm not really sure that I haven't. I mean, I wouldn't have. So you're saying that Obama didn't give any money to the sort of like
he gave some money,
very right wing militias, and
no, he didn't give money to right wing militias. That's not my point. I wasn't even talking about the right wing militias. What I'm saying is that he didn't give shit to them outside of like very like he basically gave them crumbs after there was an invasion of Ukrainian territory, the annexion of Crimea, and its country started to get carved up in the east. And that status quo kind of just existed ever since then, ever since 2014. We did some aid packages during Trump administration, but even those were almost held up by Trump. He was trying to hold them up. And so I feel like when you think about the amount of weapons that Russia's funneled in to Donetsk and Luhansk in those 8 years, when you look at the aggressive movements they made in annexing Crimea, and you look at how Obama responded. Can I read one of the statements Obama made at the time in an interview he did, I think with the New York Times? I posted this today because I saw Obama trying to kind of whitewash it. Here it is.
Go ahead.
Here's a statement. Here's from an interview. Obama made clear that he is only going to evolve America more deeply in places like the Middle East to the extent that the different communities there agree to an inclusive politics of no victor, no vanquished. The United States is not going to be an air force of Iraqi Shiites or any other faction. Despite Western sanctions, he cautioned President Vladimir Putin of Russia could invade Ukraine at any time. And if he does, and this is the quote, trying to find our way back to a cooperative, functioning relationship with Russia during the remainder of my term will be much more difficult. That is the most milquetoast, like, if you try to conquer all of Ukraine, we might not be super friendly. There's not even like a real threat here. There's not even like this almost, to me, if I was Putin, I read this, I'd be like, oh, we would stop texting on Snapchat? Is that what's going to happen to me? Oh my goodness, that isn't too bad.
Well, I mean, first of all, Russia was never probably going to try to conquer all of Ukraine, quote unquote, because that's just kind of
they would never do that. They would never do that.
Well, no. I mean, they're just trying to mostly take the eastern port. Like they realize. I'm sure that they realize how ridiculous that would be. It's a very large country.
I mean, they marched on the
Like, you're not gonna.
capital. They were trying to take the capital. They tried to encircle it.
Well, yeah.
They marched
yeah,
on
but I think
Mykolaiv. They marched on Kiev. They marched on Cherniv. They tried to get Cherniv to surrender, but they didn't. And then they engaged in the siege for a month. They tried to march on many cities. And in my mind, from how they talked about denazification at the start of the war, they wanted to do regime change in Ukraine. They wanted to take the government, bring it down. I think that also correlates with the assassination attempts on Zelensky's life, and tried to engage in regime change. And when that failed, they just settled for what they could get, which was land grabs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No. I mean, yes, they did those things. They tried to invade Kiev, but I think it's more the reason wasn't because they were planning on occupying the whole country. The reason was because that was the lead. Kiev was holding the leader of the army that is against them. They're trying to, again, yeah, like you said, do a regime change and oust him, so that they could like put an end by killing their leader or just basically getting rid of him. I don't think it was for the purpose of occupying the country, because that is, again,
well, that would be
right.
If you send in a military and you're going to do a regime change, you're going to have to occupy the country afterwards. I mean, and when you see how the Russian military acted, especially in the Kiev Oblast, and like extrajudicially executing all those people, engaging in what they called a cleansing operation. Their words from intercepts, not mine. It seemed like they were getting ready for a long and brutal occupation with an iron fist. And you can see like all the reports on torture facilities and the rounding up of people and the imprisonments. It seems to align with that idea that they were ready for a long, drawn-out occupation. I mean, anytime you do a regime change, you're going to have some occupation, especially if the domestic population is hostile to you. Iraq is a great example of that.
I mean, yeah, well, just because they're ready to do that, that doesn't mean that they're going to do it, though. I mean, when you're going to a war with a country,
so they were going
to be ready for everything.
They were going to
right?
invade Ukraine, take the capital, say Zelensky's gone, and then just leave.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, as soon as they installed their puppet or whatever,
That puppet? I mean, we saw what happened in 2014. What would stop the Ukrainians from just overthrowing this very obvious puppet installed by the Russian government immediately when Russian soldiers left? I mean, a lot of them picked up arms and joined volunteer corps to fight the Russians. Those people still, well, some of them, many of them have died. Those people still exist. I mean, we saw all the Ukrainians like getting Molotovs and guns and stuff. I mean,
Or I don't know. Okay, maybe not. Maybe they didn't even want to install. Maybe they just wanted to kill Zelensky. They just wanted to kill Zelensky, so they demoralized the Ukrainian army because that's their leader. So like I don't. Maybe they just wanted to kill the guy. They just wanted to get to him. That's all. Like I don't know. Like
I think
they
wanted
the Russians' exact intentions.
I think if you look at like Putin's speech, the way he talked about Ukraine seemed to be like this, and this is me summarizing him. So I'm not using his exact words because I don't remember. It's like an hour-long speech. I don't know his exact words. But it seemed to be the message of Ukraine is an artificial creation created by Lenin and then was given Crimea by Khrushchev in the 1950s. It is an anti-Russian creation, which, if it exists, can only exist if it's subservient to Russian interests, both security, resource, economic. And so if Ukraine will not exist as friendly to Russia, then Ukraine will not exist as friendly at all. That seemed to be the premise of his speech, in my opinion, with a lot of like historical mumbo jumbo, revisionism, etc. And when I listen to that message, I think that was his goal. That it was either to change Ukraine, bring back Yanukovych, maybe bring back a more pro-Russia government, probably even more tightly controlled by Putin than Yanukovych was, or erase Ukraine from the map. And as they've annexed more and more territory, including like towns and cities that have like no interest whatsoever, not even like one, we're not even talking like 20 to 30% of the population wants to be part of Russia. We're talking like nobody wants to be part of Russia. Like Mariupol has no pro-Russia support in that city. It's almost like there's almost none. They're engaged in a campaign of basically washing away the Ukrainian identity as they're forcing on the passport. So I think it was always a conquest, either in the style of you will have a government that's loyal to me, or in the style of you are now Russian.
I mean, yeah, sure. You might be right about this. And again, I'm no I'm no longer like having the burden of like defending Russia. So yeah, you might just be right about that. May maybe Russians see Ukraine like I don't know, kind of like we see a lot of our fucking neighboring Latin American countries with like the Monroe Doctrine. Like if anybody else comes in here, we're going to fuck them up. So like yeah, it might just that might just be the case.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to ask. I feel like my audience wants to get back to news, so I want to make sure that you have your chance to ask me whatever question you wanted to ask me.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, I just had a question so why do you and the American media seem to talk so much about this Ukraine war and not nearly as much about all the other wars that are going on right now in the world?
Well, I'm in Ukraine and I'm covering it on the ground. I'm surrounded by it constantly. The bombing, the tragedy of the war, and
Yeah.
obviously with it, a lot of the people being affected being my friends. And I got back from Kherson recently, and my friend John Jones, an elderly British expat who was volunteering in animal rescue, he was shelled during rescue operations, and he got hurt. And so when I'm around that, it entered his lower abdomen and his like upper thigh, the shell casings and stuff like that. When I'm surrounded by that constantly, it makes me want to talk about it constantly because I think it's an important issue. But this isn't the only thing I care about. I've said before that I would like to move on to other conflicts like the civil strife in Myanmar, the revolution that's going on there, real people's democratic revolution.
Yeah.
I'd like to cover Syria, but I'm also 22. And when I came of age, this was the big European war that happened, the largest war in Europe since World War II. And I do believe in the Ukrainian struggle for independence, and so that's why I focus on it so much.
Okay, sure.
So
All right, but why? Okay, but sure. But why do you think the media is doing that? The American media is doing that because all right. So did you know? Are you aware that America is involved in 4 different wars right now?
Well, well, it depends when you say involved in wars and what you mean by wars. But yeah, I know we're involved in many different places. We're deployed in Syria.
Yeah.
We have troops in Iraq. We of course are sending weapons to Ukraine. What's the 4th war? I mean, maybe it's like drone strikes.
No,
there's
actually a few others. Yeah, Somalia. Yep, Somalia is one of them.
Yep.
Yemen. Where I don't think we have troops sending weapons and shit.
We're sending weapons, but that seems to be kind of in a weird limbo status right now. We don't really know they might be negotiating a peace deal between the two groups. I'm extremely pessimistic when it comes to these types of things, so I don't necessarily think it's going to succeed. Or even if it does succeed, there's still going to be violence as the power balancing happens as the Saudis pull out. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that
there's one of them. There's one that you missed too, by the way. There's another one where apparently Niger were involved in a war there, which I had absolutely no fucking clue before I looked this up.
Well,
we have, yeah.
I think
so we're there too, but you never fucking hear about that though, do you? And I'm just asking because I'm wondering why. Like, what's your theory? Why do you think the American media never talks about these nearly as much?
I think there's a few reasons. I think the first reason, and this is I'm trying to be as sympathetic here as possible, but I think the first reason is that when violence in certain parts of the world happens, some people think that that's just commonplace. Oh, that's that part of the world. It's always been like that, and so for them, it's not a major news story. It's like, for example, the Beirut port explosion was in and out of the news super quick. There's a lot of stuff like that. As we're talking about this, a diver who went off to Titanic, and got crushed like it was a soda can, of these people. Very sad that 19-year-old kid died. But off the coast of Greece, hundreds of Syrian and other type of refugees drowned after a boat tipped over on the seas off of Greece, and that's gotten basically no coverage in the media whatsoever. And I think to some extent it comes off of the idea that part of the world, that type of violence is commonplace. It is what it is. They've always been like that. And I really don't like that mindset whatsoever. Because I think if an issue, I think if the violence is heavy, I think if it's a humanitarian crisis, it should get the amount of coverage that it deserves. I think the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey didn't get as much coverage as it deserved. And the coverage that it did get focused mostly on Turkey, almost not at all on Syria, even though that had, in a lot of instances, less support structures than even the Turkish government, which had a terrible, terrible response. I think that's one part of it. I think another part of it is in a lot of these conflicts is not as easy for America to be the quote unquote good guy. And I think that's an element. Nobody wants to hear about the government being the bad guy.
Yeah,
I think that might be a part of it.
I think our media doesn't like reporting on it either because of that. Yeah,
but I think there's a bigger point as well. And then we're gonna go to the coup coverage, and we have to move off of this, okay? Because I got to get back to this. But I also think that we're talking about the largest war in Europe since World War II. And a lot of people don't realize that this is a very historic event. It is also probably one of the most, if not the most violent and deadly wars currently going on in the planet. While I've been here, I found out that this is now probably the most mined country in the world. As 1/3 of the territory of Ukraine is covered in mines, it's going to take 70 to 100 years to demine the country. We're talking about making a second Cambodia when it comes to the humanitarian situation with mines killing civilians. And these are issues that don't even get that much coverage because it's not as flashy as the battles. It's not as flashy as the military engagements, right? I did a month in bed with the miners doing this type of work. It doesn't get as much coverage as it deserves.
Well, I mean, okay, so the starvation in Yemen is incredibly bad. It's actually like, I think I read that it's the worst this century so far. So like, it's not the it's worse.
I said it's the most violent. I said it's probably one of the most violent and large scale wars in the world currently going on.
Okay.
I don't know which war would be more large scale with more troops involved when we're talking millions of people deployed. For example, Myanmar. There's like genocide that the government has been involved in when it comes to the Rohingya Muslim population. But current estimates has the military formations like under 100,000 troops. And when we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking millions of people like possibly being deployed or have been deployed with like hundreds of thousands being killed in combat and possibly more. And civilian casualties where the UN can't even get to areas to inspect like Mariupol and other locations. Largest mass grave being uncovered in Izium, over 440 bodies since the Yugoslav genocide. So I do think that it is one of the largest humanitarian catastrophes in the world, and it is probably the largest war currently going on the planet. So I do think it deserves the coverage. In fact, I would say that it is on a lot of the issues that matter, like demining, it's not getting proper coverage. My main point would be that all of these types of conflicts, I think, should be getting more coverage, including the war in Ukraine. What I really don't like is when people start pitting these like peoples that are being invaded or colonized or killed like on a scale, like, you know, like trying to be like, well, I'm angry that they're getting attention and I'm not, but they're going to take it out on the population that is getting more attention than the group that's also getting fucked over. I don't like that shit.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Sure. I don't know. I just think that it's kind of almost criminal that a lot of these other conflicts we mentioned get almost no coverage. Like Niger, like who the fuck heard of that one? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just very strange to me.
Okay, man. I gotta go. My chest's getting angry. They're leaving now. They don't want me. They want me to go back to the coup coverage. I gotta see you later. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Yeah. See you later, dude.
Yeah, see you later, man. You have a good one. Bye bye.
You too.
Man. Yo, I see you guys in chat like Dylan.